Tech Innovators.
Hello, and welcome to Age Tech Innovators, the podcast where we explore how technology is transforming the way we care for our aging population. I'm Monty, and each week we chat with inspiring leaders who are making a real difference in the lives of older adults, sharing innovations and ideas that help support and uplift those who need it most. Join us as we work together to build a brighter, more caring future for everyone. Now, let's dive in. So I have the honor to be chatting to Daniel today from SureSafe. Daniel, run me through who you are and what you do in 60 seconds.
Hi, Monty. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and SureSafe to the podcast. Really appreciate the opportunity. So I'm Daniel Westhead. I am one of the co-founders of SureSafe and Digitech, so two different companies. And I am the managing director in charge of our UK operations. So 60-second nutshell on who we are and what we do. SureSafe is a direct-to-consumer brand in the UK and also in Australia. I would say we are one of the top 3 direct-to-consumer providers, brands known in both territories, servicing tens of thousands of customers globally. Statistically, I think we've sold in excess of 70,000 devices. We're keeping tens of thousands of people safe on a daily basis. And then more recently, we've introduced Digitech, which is our business-to-business brand. Maybe we'll touch on this a little bit later, but at SureSafe, we recognized kind of a gap in the market in terms of technology. And we moved from being simply a supplier, direct consumer, to being a product designer, developer, manufacturer, and supplier to plug the gaps. And what we recognized in doing that, as we've developed our first couple of products, is that it's not just SureSafe that has these gaps. So we launched Digitech as a business-focused brand and company that sells or resells those products and services to other providers of techs in the age tech space. So two hats, but under a very similar banner.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your time today, and I'm really excited to dive into some of the perspectives that you have. And I'm really curious, and I'll ask you some questions on this later, about how you see health tech and telecare in different territories, because I know that you live in New Jersey, you operate in the States, you operate in Australia, you're launching in the States, and you're super active in the UK. So I'm really curious to hear from different, how it is from different regions. But before we go into that, I already know the story, but I think our listeners will find it really intriguing. What inspired you to enter into this health tech, age tech space?
It's a good question. I would say that our story is similar to a lot of companies that enter a market with a goal to disrupt things, do things better, do things differently than what's currently available. I guess I always come back to, I think it's Plato's proverb of necessity is the mother of invention. And that's really what started it for us at SureSafe. So going back over a decade or so, maybe a little bit longer, maybe close to 15 years now, I'm starting to feel my age. My best friend and I, so Joel, my best friend, he's the other co-founder. He heads up our Australian operations. By chance, we were both going through similar situations with our families that presented similar challenges to us. Both of our grandmothers, so his grandmother in Australia and my nan in Liverpool, both had changes in circumstances that were causing them, issues with being at home. With his grandmother, his grandfather passed away. They'd been together 50 years, and all of a sudden she found herself at home alone and feeling quite isolated. And then with my nan, my grandfather passed away also, but we think that led to a significant onset of dementia. So dementia then set in fairly quickly after, and her needs changed quite significantly. We're both very active with our families and caring for our loved ones. So we were both involved with trying to find the best type of care for them, what the best solutions would be to help them live better lives. And to be honest, it was a real challenge. We were really disappointed with what was available from an information perspective, from a product perspective, from a pricing perspective, and it became, unfortunately, in a time of high stress, it became even more stressful trying to navigate through what was available. The biggest concern for us being the actual products. We felt, we were in our late 20s, early 30s at the time. Tech was moving forward, obviously not to where it is now, but tech was moving forward. And what we were being offered it felt super dated. We did the best we could in the circumstances with getting them the right care that they needed. But we both came together and thought, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be a better way to use tech. What we wanted to do was make it so that other people in our circumstances, whether it's the children of grandchildren of, loved ones of people who are faced with these challenges, have more options, better options, affordable options. And that's kind of where things kicked off.
So when going from this idea to actually your first actionable step, what did you do? I know that people always think, well, it's easy to have ideas, but actually the hard bit is the execution. How did you go from thinking, I'm not happy with this? What was the first thing you did?
The first thing we did was make a number of mistakes, which I think is probably what happens to a lot of early businesses.
Well,
I think what we found out quickly is we didn't know what we didn't know, and what we didn't know was quite a lot. So one of the first things we had to focus on was kind of like immersing ourselves in the industry, spending a lot of time researching what's currently available, who the current tech providers are, what tech could be useful that isn't currently being deployed or wasn't currently being deployed that might be suitable. We spent a lot of time looking at how people access this, because I think access is fundamental to a successful industry. And when I talk about a successful industry to me is that the user gets a positive experience and the user's family gets a positive experience. So it was a lot about research in the first instance, and from there, what we looked to do was build a roadmap out of how we wanted to move the business forward with a short, medium, and long-term plan. We realized pretty quickly that the tech progress that we wanted to make available and introduce, that couldn't happen in year one. That takes a bit of time to develop, to test, to educate people on. So we started off working with some existing products that were available, and then building a network, building a brand, getting a footprint, in the market, getting known. And then in the parallel to that, started looking at, okay, well, what are the product gaps? What can we do differently? What can we find that makes things more affordable for people? Because I think affordability is one of the foundations on which our business was built. We recognized that the majority of people don't have a lot of spare cash, particularly this demographic where most people are on fixed incomes. And that was, 10 years before the, cost of living crisis that we're going through at the moment. So yeah, that was kind of the early days, get ourselves set up and then keep building that plan. And then the important thing moving forward is making sure that plan continues to progress year on year. So where are we now and where do we want to be in 2 years, 5 years in terms of we can harness to bring to the market to continue to improve, the user experience.
So it's rare that I talk to organizations that have a footprint in the UK and in Australia. How did that happen?
So to be honest, more accidental than anything else. I mean, it was, if we go back to when we started, we formed in Australia initially. So my business partner, Joel, he's Australian. I was living in Australia at the time. So I used to work in finance. We both used to work in finance. I was transferred to Australia with my employer at the time, and it was there business was formed. And Australia was where we set up initially. And then we saw that, obviously, with what I experienced with my nan in Liverpool, there was as big a need in the UK. So it made sense. His accent, fitted the Australian market better, and my accent fitted the UK market better. So that's how we decided who was going to be covering which of the territories. So, yeah, it was. I think fortune and luck and timing plays a role in success as much as many other things. And we had that fortune that our nationalities were in those two territories. And then moving into the US, I live in the US for personal reasons. My wife and kids are American, and I've lived here for over 10 years. We haven't moved into the US in that 10-year period, predominantly because the Australian and UK markets are so vibrant, such a big opportunity, and there's so much to do there. There's so much runway to develop and move forwards that we didn't want to dilute ourselves, stretch ourselves too thin. We would rather do two territories, hopefully very well, than try and do three things and give like a mediocre result. But we always kept an eye on the US market, and we've seen some changes in the US market that have opened up a couple of niche areas where we believe that, again, comes back to the user for us. We're a user-centric business. That is our priority first and foremost, because we know that if we make our customers happy, then we will be successful as a result. We've seen a couple of gaps open up in the market for where people aren't being looked after, aren't being catered for, and that's where we've transitioned to in the US as well.
You can say no to this; it's absolutely fine. But where are those gaps?
Maybe give me a few months to establish our foothold in those gaps, and then I might be more forthcoming. But
Well, I've got a lot of US listeners, so I asked that as a joke. You don't need to give away your secret sauce.
yeah,
But along a similar thread is you have had a lot of experience. You mentioned a key thing is about this, how this technology is adopted, and you've been talking about the US and also the UK. How does the US and the UK differ in terms of Australia and the UK? How does Australia and the UK differ in terms of bringing innovation from a B to C perspective into the market?
I think the biggest differentiator is public policy in the two countries being wildly different. In Australia, they have a much more advanced approach in terms of being proactive at getting care for people sooner. So a large percentage of the older population in Australia, it has access to care packages that are government funded. And the thought process there is the government would prefer to spend a little bit of money now on managing risks and preventing things happen and keeping people in their homes longer, which, shock horror, it's what people want too. And so that lines up quite nicely. So they'd rather spend a little bit of money now and avoid spending a huge amounts of money on people that go into the hospital system, go into the care system, and then subsequently can't afford it. So what that's meant is it's pushed out at a much higher percentage of the population through more established national networks. So there's more national oversight as to the type of tech that's being used. And I kind of feel that creates a more national centre of excellence over there. So they work closer and listen more, I guess, to the companies that operate in that space that talk about, okay, here's a new product, here's a new feature, here's something that's going to help that group of people. So I think that has a big impact on adoption at a national level, at a pushing it out level. Whereas I think the UK is more a war of attrition. I think it's a very fragmented country in terms of how tech for older people is assigned, assessed, given access to. I mean, I think last time I checked, there's over 150 local authorities in the UK, and you go back 20, 25 years, everything was local authority driven, and every local authority had their own. Well, most of them had their own schemes, and some of them were means tested, some of them are needs tested. Some of them use this technology, some of them use that technology. Obviously, things have changed since then, but it's still incredibly fragmented. So I think that has a big impact. I think public policy is probably the biggest influence on the mass distribution of how what tech is used and how that tech gets out there.
Does that mean that in the UK you're focusing more on raising awareness with the service users directly, whereas in Australia you're focusing more on working with the government bodies who are helping raise awareness with these care packages? and more it's more of a B2B approach. A B2B to C approach in Australia is, you're saying, is more successful than in the UK.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the models are different. You're right, and you've hit that pretty much nail on the head. I think what I would say with Australia is there is a direct B2C market there that we do operate with,
Yeah, yeah.
and we focus on, quite heavily, and we service, to the same standard with the same products that we've developed. So we don't differentiate; they get the same high quality products and services. But yeah, it's about raising awareness at national and state level over there. Whereas in the UK, and this is interesting, this has changed for us a little bit recently because we've seen a change of need. We were predominantly focusing on the consumer and raising awareness with the consumer, and not just raising awareness, but having a solution that is more accessible for them in terms of being affordable, in terms of being simple to use. So it's not just a case of letting them know it's there, but making them comfortable when they do find us and our products, that A, they can afford it, and B, the person using it, who's typically in their 80s or above, is able to use it simply, quite quickly, simply, easily, and without any problems. But what we have shifted to recently, and I touched on it earlier with the new brand, the new business that we set up, which is Digitech, which is our business to business operation, is we're focusing there on other tech providers, tech suppliers, I should say, and making our products that we're developing available to them. Because what I see in the UK is there's the direct to consumer piece, which is an open market and people can target, and we have the SureSafe brand for that. There's still a large percentage of users, new users that come to the market that access it through some sort of government funding or some sort of housing association based funding. And what we're trying to do with them is raise their awareness now that there are alternatives. I think what we've seen over the last 3 decades is 2 or 3 companies have sold 95% of the technology. And that technology has served the purpose. I'm not here to knock it, but technology has changed since then. So we're trying to make people aware that, there is choice, there is potentially better available, and we only have access with SureSafe to the direct consumer channel. There's a whole chunk over here that, okay, we can't access them, but we think they should be able to access these products and have the choice to. So we're going to share that with the people who are filtering those products down to them, who are supplying them, and give them the access to these products. Because what we see, which tells me why this is so important, is so we've gone from a position of taking tech that other tech providers manufacture, rebranding that and selling that to our consumers. And we still do that. We still work with some big tech manufacturers and have great relationships with them, and the products they create are fundamentally good. But what we see through SureSafe is we offer those products, those what I would describe as your traditional box and button type devices. And then we offer the products that we've designed, developed, and manufactured. The ones we've designed, developed, and manufactured are typically more expensive. Not massively, but more expensive because the tech is a little bit more, high tech. Between 8 and 9 out of 10 people, when given the choice, are choosing this tech, the new tech.
That's interesting.
Because it does more. Because it helps people it provides a higher level of protection, whether that's the ability to be protected anywhere. So one of the big things our products do is it's anywhere protection, not just while you're at home. So that's really reassuring for the user. It's really reassuring for the family member to know that when they're out in the car, when they're walking the dog, when they're going to the shops, when they're just taking the bins out in the evening, that they've got access. They're able to still call for help from wherever they are. They're not restricted to a radius within the phone socket or the internet router as it would be now. And then the other big feature that we have, which we find people are choosing time after time as one of the main drivers, is our devices, the devices we develop, have the ability to communicate through the wearable, as opposed to wearing a trigger that activates a base unit that's plugged into a landline somewhere downstairs. And when people actually take the time to think through what that means in the event of an emergency, and I always share the example of my mum has a fall in the bathroom, the shower's running, the door's closed. She's wearing a traditional alarm. She pushes the button. It activates the base unit downstairs, but she's laying on the floor in the bathroom. She doesn't know if it's activated. She doesn't have anyone talking to her, telling her the help's okay. And then also from a process perspective, from an ARC, a monitoring center perspective, not being able to talk to the user when the alarm's activated really slows things down. Almost sometimes to the point where it's a police welfare check as opposed to an ambulance going out. So you can be talking like several hours sometimes before help is on the way. And we contrast that with our mobile devices, our anywhere devices, where we can talk to the person wherever they are as soon as the help's needed. And that does two huge things. In terms of speed of response, people get the right help quickly because you speak to our operator straight away, you explain what's happened, and then they can call the emergency services. You get an ambulance there with classed as a high priority because it's, maybe they've fallen and got a broken bone, maybe they're short of breath, maybe they're having a stroke, whatever it may be, but you then become a priority as opposed to a welfare check. And then importantly, from a user perspective, it's that peace of mind that I can hear someone helps on the way. I'm not laying on the floor wondering, is it going to be 5 minutes or 5 hours until someone, is at the door trying to help me? And then I also look at the impact on the NHS and the impact on resources that saves. So the number of false alarms that it reduces, because if it is, a false activation, it's quickly cleared up just by communicating, and then there's no call to the ambulance or to the police service. Yeah, that's a fairly long-winded way of saying we've transitioned from being purely a consumer-focused business in the UK to a consumer brand and a other supplier brand, because we feel that there is a need for those products to be available to everyone, not just those people that are in the open market, those that don't access funded services.
So it's a little bit like, as you say, you have your brand, but then underneath that brand, you're acting as somewhat of a marketplace to help raise the profile of other manufactured devices if they suit the needs of the people who need it.
Yeah, I'd say it's more, so Digitech is selling our own proprietary products and services, but that's different than what is commonly available through health and social care providers, I would say. So it's giving them more options, more tools in their toolkit to be able to help people differently, because not everyone's needs are the same. A box and button is perfect for some people, but there's a large percentage of people that, if given the choice, would want more. And that's the key thing for me. At the moment, they don't get that choice.
Yeah.
And there's hurdles to overcome with this as well, because there's mindset changes within health and social care providers that do give these services, because change is not easy and it can take time to change hearts and minds of the people that have been giving out the same technology for 20, 30 years. So for us, it's education. It's speaking to these people regularly. 2024 has been a good year for us with Digitech, with getting to know a lot of these organizations. We've taken a lot of feedback from them, which we've taken on board, and we're actually adjusting some of the things we do and some of the ways we work so we can actually fit better within their models. Because I think that's important too. It's not a case of, okay, here's our product, use it how we want you to use it. It's a two-way relationship. We need to work also within the parameters that they work in and help them. So remove some of their roadblocks as well.
So a lot of what you're talking about comes down to iterating as you see there is a need to improve processes and distribution and so on. And products. So it's a general iteration based on feedback from people to improve the service that you guys are providing and the product that you guys are providing. What do you think will happen to the organizations that are not actively adopting new innovations and are not iterating upon what they are currently doing in the next couple of years?
I think they'll struggle, and I think they will start to fade away. I mean, technology will continue to develop and will, continue to improve. I think what's important to acknowledge and recognize is that buyers are becoming more sophisticated as well, and buyers want more. I think there's two things that's happening. There's a shift of gradually more people are being pushed into the open market. Look after yourself in terms of your tech needs, your age tech needs. And then the people that are buying, which is typically, people your age, my age, probably up to like 50 to 60, probably 3 out of 4, maybe even 4 out of 5 of our buyers are the family of the user as opposed to the end user. You're typically looking at people who probably at the youngest, like early 20s through to about 55-ish, who will have someone in that older demographic. And they see how tech changes, on a broad basis across every type of technology. And what we've seen over the last few years is more and more people saying, well, shouldn't it do a little bit more than that? Or couldn't it be a little bit more sophisticated than that? Or, isn't there a few more features that we can get with this? This feels a bit dated. So I think what you'll find is kind of like with companies that aren't adapting and aren't keeping up to date with what's available, I think they will start to fall away because people want choice, and there is choice. And obviously in the age of the internet, people can very quickly find out the different options that are available to them. So I think adopting tech is key to being sustainable in this space. I don't think it's a race to be first in tech by any stretch.
Oh, can you say more? Can you say more about that? That's an interesting one. So it's not a race to adopt new technology.
No, it's not. I don't think so. No, I think so one thing that's very different about our sector compared to when I look at other sectors and how they have had tech develop is the rate of adoption. So there's a lot of talk about, tech is developing at an exponential rate. It's improving, AI, machine learning, robotics, all these things that are going on. And even at a consumer level, things like, TVs, home automation, it's just continuously improving. Your iPhone, like the number of changes of your iPhone over the last just few years. Adoption in our industry is much, much slower. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, where would I think we would have been now in terms of the types of tech currently being used mainstream, with a reasonable percentage of people, I would have probably listed a couple of things that just aren't there yet.
What would you have listed? Sorry to jump in, but what would you have listed? I'm very super curious on this.
The main one I would have listed would have been home automation and linking smart homes into care. And there's a number of companies that have developed products like that. We've got some development in the background on home automation, smart home type systems that include machine learning, includes, intelligent assessment of data to identify trends, to, spot potential issues before they might happen. And there's companies that have got this, this tech out there now. But when you look at the percentage of homes that it's in, based on what we see as the available market and the number of purchases out there, it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. You see some local authorities have got little pockets of it that they're testing out, and you see some trials in places, but no mass adoption. But you would think when I look at my home and everything's automated, lights, heat, sound, it hasn't got there. It's not even a thing for me in terms of what's generally available.
Do you think the slow rate of adoption, at least of what we see within the UK in the telehealth space, is not, or do you think it's because of the fragmented nature and how these devices are funded versus, or do you think it's the actual appetite for families to try new things to keep their loved ones safe at home? Or do you think it's a combination of both?
I think it's definitely a combination of both. I think there's a few factors. I think from taking the last one first, from family members wanting to try new things, I think there is a willingness to try new tech if it's going to be helpful. Where I think this falls down for a lot of people, particularly some of the more complicated solutions that might be available, is they are too complicated for people and there's too much heavy lifting. And the majority of purchases from our consumers happen after a critical event. So you've got someone who's recently bereaved, who's just been diagnosed with a medical condition, who's just had an operation, is coming out from the hospital, has recently had a fall. So the family are dealing with something that's very worrying, taking up a lot of their mind. They're worrying about the health and well-being of their loved one. If you then factor in trying to introduce a new tech that's complex, it becomes one step too much for them.
Yeah.
Whereas having a wearable that's a simple push button, it's an easy win as an easy improvement. And to be clear, ease of use is actually, I talked about affordability being one of our pillars. The other key pillar for us is ease of use. So we make sure that anything that we're looking to put out to market is literally almost where it pushed the button, or where it does what it's supposed to do itself, sort of thing. Because I think that's key. I mean, again, you got to remember that we have two users. We have the user as a family who's get it set up and get it in place and choose it. But we've got the user who actually wears it. And that person's typically in their 80s and may have limited cognitive ability, probably has limited eyesight, which makes use more challenging. Yeah, so I think it's a combination of factors. The fragmented nature of the market, I think, is significant, a significant impact on the rollout of new tech. The other big challenge, I think, is a combination of affordability and scale of purchase, and kind of the two things competing against one another. So in order to be able to deliver a product to the market at a price that a high volume of people can afford, you have to be able to build it at scale. And unless you're able to drive that scale, you can't get that price. So that I've seen as a challenge in the market at the moment. Affordability has a significant impact. Taking my Digitech hat off and wearing my SureSafe hat, I've lost track of the number of product presentations that I've had to me over the last 5 years, 10 years, where a company, similar to us, trying to do something different, trying to build something new, comes to us, presents a product, and I'm like, this looks great. Yeah, features look really good. And then they tell me the price, and straight away, it kills it. And it kills it not because it's something that we can't make money on. It's because people can't afford it. And if people can't afford it, then we can't sell it in any sort of volume. And then, I have that conversation with them. So, your price point is way above what 95% of people will pay. And the reason is because they can't scale it. So there's a few things that make this market a challenge, but pressure makes diamonds, they say. So I guess if it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Well, on that line is, what for those people who are listening, and they really appreciate the breakdown of how important it is to have technology that is super simple. I like the concept of, if it's very simple in small scale, it's possible to do it at large scale. But if it's complex at small scale, then it's impossible to do it at large scale. It's impossible. Like the processes, the returns, all these things. And I also agree in terms of what you're saying, where when things are too expensive, then you're ultimately, I think within this market, the real money, at least from a business perspective, or the real value that you can create for people, and therefore in the return for that value that you create for people, which is money, is really across a high volume of people rather than a select few. So what encouraging advice would you offer to listeners after you've just run through all this? What encouraging advice would you offer to listeners considering either coming up with their own innovation the way that you've done, or just entering into this space for a career?
So I think it's an incredibly exciting industry, and it is one of the perfect storms in terms of opportunity. It's a combination. The industry is a combination of tech, which is the fastest growing industry. It produces the most revenue, globally, the tech industry. And that it's combined with a demographic that over the next couple of decades will be the biggest demographic in our population. So if you look at opportunity, it's definitely there. I think the right person with the right approach has real potential to do well in the industry. I think what's really interesting as well, when I look at, again, feeling my age right now, when I look at the next generation for me they place a lot more weight on social value and social impact, potentially, than maybe people at my generation do. Not to say that we don't, but, being good to the environment, being good to people, making a difference, a positive difference outside of money, seems to be more popular now. I think what the industry allows you to do, what this industry allows you to do, is really make that change. So you can have a positive impact on people's lives, their overall well-being. It's interesting because I often have to remind myself of this, and I'm often reminding my team of this. So we'll be, busy working, and, like anyone, work's busy, you get stressed. And then I'll come across something like a piece of feedback or a review or an email someone sent in about a situation where, one of our devices, one of our services has made a tangible difference to someone. And I just have to stop and I'm like, hang on a second, we're moving at 100 miles an hour to do this, but let's not forget this is the reason we are doing this. And there's one story that always sticks in my mind. And when I'm bringing new people into the team, I actually talk about this because I want to get people's reaction to, how meaningful would this be to you? So we got some feedback a couple of years ago now from an individual who bought an alarm. Bought an alarm after his grandmother had a stroke. She went to hospital, she came out, so they bought an alarm in case it happened again. Fast forward a year later, she has a stroke again. She pushes the button. It calls for help, and she's in the hospital within a couple of hours. He goes into the hospital room to visit her, and she's still wearing her pendant. And she holds it up to him and says, this helped, this worked, and had a smile on her face. And unfortunately, the story didn't end well. In that, unfortunately, this lady passed away that night in the hospital. But what it meant to the grandson that bought it was, he said, and this is what really hit home, he said, my grandmother passed away, but she passed away surrounded by her loved ones in a hospital bed, feeling safe, as opposed to, lying on the floor for an unknown period of time and dying on a bathroom floor. And he said, for me, there is nothing that beats that in terms of what it did for us and our family, to know that we all got to say goodbye, and she died peacefully in a bed surrounded by loved ones, as opposed to on her own, scared on the floor. So that, for me, even saying it now, I'm like this.
I'm going to cry.
Even with a not positive outcome, that's what I have to. I always have to bring it back to that.
Yeah.
I bring it back to that with my team, because everyone forgets and everyone gets caught up in things. So I think, coming back to the question, I think of what can motivate people to get into this industry. Why is it that people can get into it? If you have a desire to care for people and make a difference, there's a real opportunity here. Particularly if you've got, there are a lot of industries where if you do have that kind of way, you can go into nursing care, healthcare, various things. But often people who don't have that expertise, they might be tech people, they might be, entrepreneurs. There's ways to do it, and this is one industry where you can make a tangible difference to people's lives.
That's really, really beautiful. And I've actually got one more question to close up the episode. It's gone so quickly. They're normally a little bit shorter, but I was really enjoying just hearing your thoughts on things. My last question is, imagine we fast forward the clocks 65 years, 70 years, and you look down at your arms, and your arms are really wrinkly, and your hands are really wrinkly, and you look in the mirror, and you're shocked. You've lost all your hair, and your face is you're an elderly man. What would you like your day to be like, and what technology would you like to use when you are in your senior years?
That's a really good question. I think, first of all, if I fast forward to 75 years, if I'm still around, I'm doing pretty well. I might be in the Guinness Book of Records, because I'm possibly a little bit too old to be around for that stage. But putting that bit to one side, what I would love to see is tech that is an everyday part of my life. So what I notice in the current, in kind of my generation, and now starting to move younger than me, is a greater level of education and awareness around health, around longevity, around nutrition. My parents and people older than that just didn't have. So I think there's a move now towards being more proactive around managing our own health and well-being. And I think if we can link that to tech that gives us access to more data, early signals if things are going wrong, still the ability to call for help, where it gives you a more all-encompassing, a more holistic health and well-being impact, and result. I think that's where I think that would be my ideal for where tech can be. One of my shorter term goals, if I look at 10 years, would be something not too dissimilar. I think at the moment the tech is almost exclusively reactive, and there is tech available that can be more, proactive and predictive. But comes back to the scale thing.
Sorry, I didn't want to cough as a subtle plug. Sorry. Sorry, Carol.
So it is available, but that's where I think this is where it needs to go. If I look at the Australian public policy model, prevention's better than the cure, and that same thing should apply to tech. I think it needs to be able to be reactive, but if you can then start to build in proactive, predictive, educational, I can see what my body is doing.
Yeah.
And if I change these behaviors, then I see that my blood sugar goes down, my heart rate, reduces, my blood pressure changes this way. If we can start to link that so that people can start to manage what's causing them problems, I think that for me would be the panacea.
Well, I'm looking forward to that utopian future, and also for you being in the Guinness World, the Guinness Book of World Records. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for your time today. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate your perspective from the hats of both Australia and the UK and your various businesses. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity. Good to chat.
Catch you soon. Bye 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 bye.